What is culture? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. What is culture? Well, the standard definition is basically all the institutions and art and essentially just the way a society goes about solving society problems and sort of its overall character. I like to think of it as some people make a place to live in, and some people make a place worth living in. And the combination of those is what makes culture. So I think it's helpful when thinking about culture and the nature of it and what it is. I find it helpful to, I just imagine an area of land and there are no humans on it. And then at some point, humans come into that piece of land. And as a reaction to deciding that they're going to live on that land, they've made a long-term commitment to living on that piece of land. We can start to observe the ways in which the humans start to interact with the land in order to develop a relationship with it, to gain the resources to continue their human life there, right? So we'll start there. So typically that means that, the order of action for most societies when they're beginning out in an area of land is they have to find the basics. They got to find a fresh water source, they need to find food, and they need to find shelter. Usually starts with water because you can just lay your head down wherever pretty much. But usually it begins with a search to secure consistent fresh water. So when you look at the land and you look at people, that's usually the first motivation you can describe to me. Go, okay, how are they going to get water taken care of? And then if you look at the topography and the layout of the particular land, you can start to see how the people's actions can be influenced by the search for water and the need to secure water, like up front. And then you start to see what their thought process is about it, how they communicate to each other regarding it, and then also what are the tools that they're going to use to try to secure the water. Now, right there in that initial step, we have all of the elements of culture. We have a group need that's required for living. We have communication. We have leadership forming. We have a sociological structure forming. We have expression, and we have tools. Like, who knows? You can use pails or shovels, or whatever, seashells, whatever they can get together, right? Old animal skulls, I don't know. But whatever decisions they make in these regards, because it's in relation to essentially a sacred resource, water, sacred because it's nearer the primary value for survival and health and wealth and well-being. Any of the activities associated with the gathering of the water are going to be replicated as a very nearly sacred interaction. So the types of tools they use, the types of way they communicate about it, the social hierarchies, the way it looks, all the whole kit and caboodle, like everything that is associated with the procurement of the water is going to take on a heightened sense of importance because it is important. And so aesthetically and traditionally and ritually, however that goes down, that becomes part of their initial culture. It becomes valuable to them. So like even if they're not part of it and they see, oh, I see, the water pail, the painted water pail, like it makes them feel good because it reminds them they're part of the group, and it reminds them that the water is coming, and it reminds them that they can survive, they can be outside of their animal brain for a little bit, and be out of the fear of the law of the jungle, because that they see an artifact of their intelligence, they see an artifact of their society. It's like, that's the water pail. That's some part of me knows that we know where the water is. I don't have to be in torment about where's my water coming from. Do I need to be nomadic today? Am I wandering? Where am I? Like, all of that gets shut down. And so even if the person isn't actively engaged in the procurement of water at that moment or drinking it, now their higher level awareness is being engaged because they can see an artifact of a ritual procurement that they participated in, or that they know intimately is to be true because they're part of it. And just seeing it starts to bring them well-being. And that's an interesting phenomenon, because a lot of times culture is referred to in a way that's purely aesthetic, and it has no intrinsic meaning. But it's clear that there's radiance of meaning and value to culture especially when it's true culture. So in this water example, it's pretty cut and dry. And everything, the culture begets itself, right? So in this sense, when we bring people into a blank land, we're looking at it in a very kind of petri dish way. We can kind of see, the culture itself grow. Anybody who's played simulation games, that's the fun of it. All the different types of like population simulation games and reality simulation games, where you get to choose all the stuff and watch it grow and permutate. And on that level, philosophically, in terms of just on the kind of the superficial base level of the human sociological order growing out of itself to form a culture. So the culture really, on a very like philosophical utilitarian analysis, the culture are the group's response to answering the basic needs of life in relationship to the area that they're living in. So however any group of people situated anywhere in time and space reacts to the situation that they're in on the land that they're in to answer the basic needs of life, that is the formation of culture. That is the metastasizing nucleus from which everything is going to be emanating and building. And just like an atomic structure, that if that nucleus is stable, well, then the culture can have essentially infinite permutations relative to resources and decay rates and all the actual physics. That's why you do calculus and integers and limits and all that stuff, because you can project out the potentiality of it in a realistic way, like that and probabilistic models. You can kind of get a version of that, because once the nucleus is formed for a culture, then the growth can occur. And so it always begins with the basics. Anything that gets put on top of the basics in terms of cultural analysis, you can say something's trendy or this or that. There's like a base level. There's the core of the culture, which are all the things that have to happen for life to continue in that manner. And they vary, but they're all variations of getting people food, water, shelter. Those are the basics. And that's when you start getting into like higher level needs of the individuals and societies, psychological and emotional wellness and things that spring out of that. But the basics, food, water, shelter, have to be maintained for any culture. Otherwise, the culture, that means that there is no culture at that point, or the culture is, there's a void occurring, because the culture is what gives the structure to the sociological unit. In some way, we have observed that when a culture emerges and it has reliably provided for life resources to flow to its constituent members, remembering that a system is a series of interdependent and interrelated and intercausation elements that form a sophisticated whole. In this idea, the culture is a subset of, or represent a way to view the full sociological system of a society. And it's a culture one is meeting these basic needs and flowing these basic needs, and more grows off of it, because as that propagates and people trust into it to such a point that they don't even think twice about it, then the aesthetics of it and other factors are grown on it, which provide different values. They provide, because then they become things like identity, right? They become things like, they're good for psychology, they're good for morale, they're good for self-identification, group identification. But when a culture really permutates and becomes large, it has its own ecosystem, and within the ecosystem, there are different identities, different organizations that the individuals can become members of or gravitate toward, or it allows for, like, a healthy cultural ecosystem allows for not just the basics of life to flow in and to be comfortably distributed, but it also allows for higher level flows of different types of individuals and what Jung would call individuation to occur. So then now whereas like most of these cultures have begun with like a lot of limited, narrow scope functionality for the humans involved, especially in the transfer from hunter-gatherer to civilization. You're talking about, there weren't a whole lot of different lifestyles going on when people were mainly focused on survival. And then when cultures were set up and the basics were covered for long enough, then people started branching out into more life opportunities and more elaborate systems, and more elaborate parts of the culture could grow out of the basics. So then you start to get things like artisans and mercantiles and machinists, and you get people, you get farmers, and you get blacksmiths, and you get all these, like, all the different types of like lifestyles that pop up that are also now serving new needs within the culture of people, and then those elevate, and then you have the intellectual side of things comes in. You get education systems and universities, and you get doctors and lawyers and politicians, and you get formal government, and you get all these like different things that grow out of it. And ostensibly in an organic culture, each one of those layers is growing as a response to the actual needs of the people living inside those cultures, so that the permutations are organic and they're serving the proper needs, and that's why they exist. So it's still in harmony with like proper growth principles that you would find naturally, just dealing with different level energies. Instead of watering crops, you're talking about like energy, like energetic things that are good to grow souls, which is kind of where culture is pointing to. Culture is really more of a reflection of an environment for souls, really, I think, is what we're saying. And when you, it makes it fascinating when you can view it from that perspective, because then when you view all the different cultures through time and space all over the globe or wherever, you can, you get to, since you know how kind of like how they're sourced, it's fun to see them, because then you go, oh well, that's how those people figure out how to, like, that's how they like to get their water, or that's the, those are the type of food they like, or oh, that's cool, that's how they figure out their relationship with the mountains, or that's how they do this or they do that. And it's like, it's cool because you just see, if you can see their origin, and you can see where they're at, and you can see the evolution of the whole thing, and it's endlessly fascinating, to be honest, because it has all the information you could ever want in there, and it's just, it's kind of beautiful. Even the cultures that are, not great or being destructive or whatever, it's still beautiful to see all these things in play. It's like, from a philosophical perspective, it's a cornucopia of just perspectives. It's an unbelievable amount of information. Um, and bringing it, so that's like the externalization of it. But on the internalization of it, what are we talking about with cultures? Now that we know that it goes from just fulfilling the basics and coming to a land, trying to fulfill the basics, and it can, when you figure it out, it can get really built up quick and turn into something that looks like Tokyo or whatever. What's on the internal side? Well, we talked about, morals are decisions a person, individual, has to make, essentially between, like, good and bad behavior. And we talk about how ethics are a set of moral beliefs. And you're like, oh, okay, cool, these are the general, morals we all believe in. Well, a culture, on the internal perspective, is everybody's got their value systems. And when they were going from hunter gatherer and survival mode, those values were very much, obtain water, obtain food, obtain safety, right? And that was pretty unified for everybody. But then when they got those all sort of figured out, and everybody got kind of comfortable with, like, yeah, it's kind of weird, but I think we kind of got this figured out. I think, like, we know how to drink water, we know how to get our water, we have, like, some, we got some food stored up, all this is some of the real basics, and, like, yeah, nobody seems to be killing us in our hut over here. So we got those, okay. Then it kind of gave them time to think about some stuff. And then the values come to play. They go, oh well, now that we got this, like, what are what are our values? It had to come up. And then really what we're seeing is the culture, when these people started, however they wanted to communicate what they thought their values were, even if they didn't have this precise language to say it and articulate it, it started happening. At some point, the people start talking to each other and go, well, what do we really value here? And when they start coming up with the value systems, that's when the cultures get really interesting from the internal level. Is, you go, oh well, these people made decisions, conscious decisions about what they thought their values were, and they start interacting together. And it's the combination, it's the alchemy, or the chemistry of these values marrying up and creating real life actions. And then you can see that. You can see it in the actions, you can see it in the utility, you can see it in the art, you can see it in the way they think, and you can watch it evolve. But ultimately, it's all these internal values. And I think it's more interesting to see less technologically advanced cultures from this perspective, because I think you get a truer look. And then when you get into more technologically advanced, you know, certain individuals get disproportionate amount of control over the discussion of what the values are in the culture, which you can find out, but it's more difficult. But it's better pre-tech, because you can see, like, it more purely, usually, especially like way back, which I think is one of the cool things about Aboriginal cultures, is you get to see them working things out on a more uncluttered level. They're still dealing with all the same stuff, because they're human beings. They're just, you know, in their particular realm, so to say, which is super cool when you really think about it. That we're just, here we are side by side, sort of multi-dimensionally. They're like, oh, do parallel universes exist. I mean, I'm sitting here in a park, making a philosophy video on a digital phone that's going to go out to the whole world, basically. And at the same time, some dude's like in the middle of the rainforest, like trying not to get eaten by a puma, and he's just like doing his thing with like no concept of cell phones or anything. We're both here at the same time, so you tell me. And that right there, inadvertently, even just comparing the cultures, how valuable is that? Because now, in the discussion of like where I'm at, you can feel all the values. Now that we're highlighting and now we're bringing to our conscious attention, you can feel all the values that are just inherent in the situation I'm at versus the situation dude in the rainforest is at. But you kind of feel them vibe wise side by side, right? It's just it's kind of a magic trick when you are able to see it for what it is and kind of feel it for what it is. And I don't think, culture, it doesn't start out as a way to announce itself to other people. But then obviously when you get more advanced into it, when they get more developed and people take it on as identity, as with anything in life, more choices have to be made. It's just choice after choice after choice, acknowledgement, observance, perspective. And in those cases, that's another interesting level to look at culture. Okay, what does a culture do when it becomes self-aware of itself? Or, what does it do when it becomes self-aware? Does it get egotistical? Is it chill about it? Does it decide that like everybody needs to be like them because we think we're so great? Does it stay to itself? There's all kinds of things. But that's another thing that culture does too, is it gives people a chance to sort of sublimate themselves into the group and go, oh, it goes from an individual existence to now they have a group identity. And that also provides certain benefits to the human experience. So as the culture grows, it does, does the culture benefit the individual? Because at first the individual is just trying to make their way in life, and then it creates the culture. But then as the culture becomes a thing, does it benefit the individual? And I think in an analytical way it does, because the culture is a thing that sort of doesn't necessarily exist in the organic way. It's a fruit of human creation. It's a thing that exists because humans are working together. And so for that to come back to the individual to go, hey, because you've been doing all this group work together to survive and live together, now there's things you can feel good about. Like it does. It gives for many people, on the positive side of things, it gives people a tremendous sense of well-being. And even if they're alone, they don't feel like they're alone. They feel like they're part of something. They feel like they're part of the big village, so to say. And obviously cultures can go the other way, and they can manipulate that togetherness and turn themselves into empires and be very bloodthirsty and make it a negative aspect. But I don't think that that's the natural resting point. I don't think that's the natural center of gravity for culture. I think most of the time that like culture, when individuals become self-aware of the culture, then adjustments can be made and necessarily are made, whether it's internal or external. But I do think in history, looking back at it, the cultures that stay positive and calm and have that sort of outward approach, they do all right. And then the ones that are empirical, they can get powerful for periods of time, but then ultimately they do almost inevitably internally collapse. Why? Because going back just to the internal values, if you have internal values that are not based on health, basically, which is what you're saying about cultures that get to empirical stages, yeah, well, unhealthiness is unsustainable. And so, those are just those values playing out in the macro. And conversely, if you have a healthy culture and you got a healthy individuals and healthy values, then, that's a good group to be in. So culture, what is culture? It seems to be a group's response to making the basics of life happen for their group. And then at some point, it gets kind of aesthetic and self-aware and becomes an identity and becomes all sorts of other things. So it's a thing. It's a thing that we grow together. It's a thing that humans grow together in our group effort to survive in this crazy thing called life. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner. I hope you have a good day.